Hey buyers and agents, so you're watching this video right now because you're probably tired of putting in offer after offer all to be rejected. Now, in this video, we're gonna be going over some basic beginner tips and some advanced tips for buyers and agents to allow you guys to have all the information you need to go out into the marketplace, submit the most compelling offer possible, and ultimately get the property that you've been searching for. So make sure to stick around to the end of this video. You're not gonna wanna miss this one. It is gonna be super in-depth. And whether you're a new agent or a seasoned agent or a first-time home buyer or a fourth-time home buyer, there's definitely going to be some tips in here that I'm pretty sure you haven't heard before. So let's jump right into it. Really quick before the video starts, guys, I do want to give a legal disclaimer. I am not an attorney and none of this is legal advice. This video is for entertainment purposes only, and I would highly recommend that you guys consult with an attorney to review your contracts and documentation before signing or accepting any offer. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the video. All right, guys, so let's jump right into the video. So a couple of things on structure here. So the first thing we're going to be going over is 7 things that involve the contract directly in terms of how you can go ahead and leverage your offer. Now, this is very important for agents and buyers because of the fact that, let's say your agent tells you, hey, look, based off the market, based off what I know about this property, here's what our offer should be, X, Y, and Z, right? And a lot of times, because there's so many moving parts in a contract, buyers and agents can get confused. And I've seen it so many times where, they submit an offer, it's under contract, and then it comes down to doing what you said you would do in the contract. And then, buyers are upset or sellers are upset because they say, hey, well, we thought, we were offering this and not this, or we said we'd do this, but remember we said to leave this part out. You want to make sure that you can double check the agent's work, and not only just to double check the work, but to solidify in your mind that you know exactly what you're putting on the table, because it could just be a big disaster that sometimes doesn't always get resolved and the deal just completely bombs because of the lack of understanding of a contract, okay? So regardless if you're an agent or a buyer, you're gonna wanna pay attention to these things. So first thing here we're gonna look at here is paragraph 3, the sales price, which is one of the most important things in the contract, obviously. Now, a couple things to consider on the sales price is that there's 2 things, right? There's the comparables, right? You wanna know what this property is worth before making an offer. So tell your realtor to do a CMA. They're basically gonna aggregate all the data that they can find in that neighborhood that has sold within the last, let's just say 90 days, right? And they're gonna say, hey, look, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, based off of my research, 3 beds, 2 bath, 1,500 square feet, 2-story granite, blah, 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 blah. It's selling for about $200,000. This way, as a buyer, okay, this property more than likely is gonna be worth, $200,000. What should I offer? Do I wanna offer them right at value? Or is the market pretty, competitive like we're in right now? Maybe I should offer, 210 or 215, or maybe even just 205. Or I can just offer them 200, but I can leverage other parts of the contract to make my offer more appealing. So that's the first thing, right? The comparables. You want to know what exactly the property is worth. You're never going to know exactly, let me refrain. You're never going to know exactly what the property is worth, but based off the data that your realtor can provide to you, it can give you a really, really good estimate in terms of what the value is going to come back at, which brings me to my second point to consider, which is going to be the appraisal. Okay, so what the appraisal is once you submit an offer and the seller accepts, you're officially under contract. At a certain point in that contract, the bank is going to send out an appraiser to the property to essentially have them tell the bank what they believe the property is worth. And the reason for that is because the bank doesn't want to lend you $250 on a home that's only worth $200, right? It just wouldn't make sense for the bank to do, and could also put you in trouble as a buyer because you're overpaying, right, for a property that isn't worth that, right? So things to consider, right? You can just make them an offer, let's just say at whatever amount you want to offer above, asking price. But if you don't do other things that I'm about to talk about, it doesn't matter, because you're essentially saying, I'm going to pay you whatever the home is worth. So if the property comes back at 202, 205, 199, it doesn't matter. I'm going to pay you whatever that value is, right? Another thing you can do is to make your offer a little bit stronger is say, hey, look, we understand that, you know, we're offering 210 and it's probably not going to come back that high because we've seen the data. It's probably going to be around 200. What we're willing to do is pay 1 to 2,000 or 5,000, whatever you're comfortable with, above the appraised value, right? So, you know, if it comes in at 200, we'll pay you 205, right? And you could play around with this, right? And nothing is set in stone to where you can't play around with this. So you could say, hey, look, if it comes in at 200 or below, we'll give you 2,000 above. But if it comes in at 205 or more, you know, we'll just give you what the property is worth. Or, you know, if it comes in higher, we'll just give you 1,000 as opposed to the 2,000 if it comes in low, right? And the absolute best thing that you can do to guarantee your offers stand out from the crowd is completely waive the appraisal completely, right? So essentially what you're saying is like, hey, look, I don't care what the appraiser says. I'm going to give you, you know, 210 or 215. So even if the property comes in at 200, you're still going to get 215. Keep in mind, you are going to have to pay those $15,000 or whatever the discrepancy between your offer and the appraised value is out of pocket. Remember, the bank isn't going to finance you something that, you know, the property just simply isn't worth. So anything above, you know, the value of what you're offering, you will have to pay out of pocket on top of your closing costs, on top of your down payment, you know, on top of your other fixed costs. So keep that in mind when making an offer. All right. Moving on, we're going to go down to earnest money and termination options. So this is going to be in paragraph 2. Okay. So a couple things to consider here. One, typically the earnest money is, in my market, $500 to $1,000, right? So what you can always do is give more than that. You can give 2,000. You can give, you know, realistically whatever number you want. And what this is going to do in the seller's agent and the seller's eyes is show your confidence in terms of the deal closing as a whole. So earnest money, if you don't know already, is essentially good faith money. You know, this is money that once the deal goes under contract, you give to the title company to essentially think of it as like somewhat of a down payment, right? This money, if the deal funds, it's going to go towards the property. Title doesn't keep it, the agents don't keep it, it goes towards the property. But in the event that, you know, the deal were to fall through, based off certain guidelines that you have in the contract, you could forfeit the money, right? So that's why it becomes this dichotomy of how confident am I in my ability to close this transaction? Because if I'm super confident and I say, look, I don't care what happens, I don't care what the inspection report says, I don't care what the appraised value comes back at, I know for a fact this is my dream home, I want it regardless of all these other things, you can offer them $5,000 or $10,000 in earnest money because your level of confidence is so high, right? But on the other hand, if you are concerned about, hey, well, realistically, I might lose this money, you might want to do it lower, right? And this is where that dichotomy comes in. How confident are you? Because most buyers are giving, you know, 500, 1,000, 1,500. So if you're giving more money, it just shows a higher level of seriousness. But for further details, you know, definitely consult with your agent, ask them what they believe is a good amount because your market might be different, okay? Moving on to termination option. So here in this little paragraph B, this is page 2 of the contract, is where you're going to ask for a specific number of days to back out of the contract for any reason and still get your earnest money back. Now, typically what this is used for is to have the property inspected, okay? So usually what I see in here is 5 to 7 to even 10 days or more, which is, you know, not recommended. You want to minimize this. I know obviously getting a home inspector out to the property is going to affect that timeline, but I think, you know, 5 to 7 days should be more than enough time, you know, unless your inspectors in your area are super backed up. Then you want to communicate that to the agent and explain to him, hey, look, I would shorten this, but we can't find an inspector to go out there for a week and a half. So that way they're aware of why you're doing what you're doing. So yeah, you know, you're gonna have the property inspected, and based off of that report, you will make a decision whether you want to move on or just go ahead and back out of the contract. And this is what allows you to do this. Now, I'm gonna be showing you guys a bonus tip at the end of the video on how you can completely leave this blank which is going to make your offer stand out and be more powerful, but at the same time still protect yourself. So in the event that you do an inspection report and things are just horrible, or you later discover other things wrong with the property, you can still back out and keep your earnest money. So stick around for that. Okay, moving on. Right here, same page, paragraph 6. Okay, keep in mind we're on page 2. Title policy and survey. So really quickly, the survey typically the seller already has a survey, but in many cases they lose it, or they don't have it, or they misplaced it. So that is one of the things that you can offer to pay for as a buyer. Is it the seller's job? Yes. Do they have one sometimes? Yes. But in the event that they don't, you can offer to pay it, which is going to make your offer seem a lot stronger. Now, the first thing is the title policy, okay? So the title policy usually costs about 1% of the sales price, okay? And this is usually covered by the seller, but in this market, buyers are offering to pay for it to stand out, right? So if you do want to pay for it, you can put here, seller shall furnish to buyer at seller or buyer's expense the title policy, right? So if you're going to pay for it, you will check mark the buyer's expense, or obviously the agent will do this for you, and then you will just verify this. Paragraph 6, page 2. Okay, moving on. Top of page 3, we have the survey. So again, here at the bottom of the subsection 1, you have again another option, seller or buyer's expense. So if you're going to say, hey, if you don't have a survey or it is no longer valid, we will go ahead and pay for it. This is where you will go ahead and check mark that box. Okay, moving on. We are going to go down to page number 5. Okay, page number 5, subsection H. We have residential service contracts. Now, make sure I'm still recording. Cool. So we have here residential service contracts. Essentially what this is a box where you can put in a number, a dollar figure, in terms of how much money you are going to ask the seller to pay for a home warranty for you, right? So if you're not familiar with the home warranty, it's essentially, just a warranty that covers certain items in the house for the length of a year, right? And this thing can cover a wide variety of things. I'm not going to jump into it, but just for some things, plumbing, electrical leaks, your dishwasher, your garbage disposal, you can have these things all covered by a home warranty, where you essentially just pay a service fee of $50 to $100, and they will either fix the item, or if it's not repairable, they will replace it, right? In my market, these run anywhere from $400 to $600 on the high end. So here, I would recommend to leave this blank, right? If you want a home warranty, go ahead and purchase that on your own. But in a competitive market where you're trying to stand out, you definitely don't want to put anything here, because it is going to be seen as a complete negative thing in your case, right? Moving on to the bottom of page 5, we have number 9, closing. So this is one of the things that I'm going to jump into. One of the first advanced things that I'll talk about is you need to reach out, agents. You need to reach out to the seller's agent and ask them, hey, other than price, what is your seller looking for in a great offer? Sometimes they'll say, hey, well, just submit your best and final. But other times you might have agents say, hey, you know what? My seller really wants somebody who can close as soon as possible, right? So if you're here putting a 2-month closing date, right, that's just not going to look appealing at all. As opposed to doing a 30-day close where you speed everything up, right? You order the appraisal right away, you conduct inspection right away, and you just hammer through this thing. That is going to seem more appealing, because obviously that's what the seller is looking for. They might give you other bits of information. Well, you know what? They're buying under their house, and they're worried that they're not going to have enough time to transition, right? And this is another advanced tip where you can do a lease back option, right, for free. So essentially what you're saying is you put it in the contract to where, hey, once we close on the home, I know as a buyer's agent that my buyers aren't going to have a payment for the next 30 to 45 days, right? So we will give the sellers or the previous owners an additional 2 weeks after closing to settle in, completely move out, finish closing on their home, or finish transitioning, or finish moving, whatever it may be, to essentially give them that peace of mind that, they're not going to be rushed out the door once they close. Because it does create a lot of anxiety for sellers. Like, man, I'm closing on my new house on this day, but I have to be out of this house by this day. And it's like, man, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna rent a hotel? Are we gonna have to put everything in storage? And by you coming out the gate and saying, hey, look, once we close, if your seller needs it, we'll give them some additional time to fully move out. That is gonna put a lot of ease in the seller's mind and could be the determining factor if you have two very similar offers. Okay, so to summarize on paragraph 9 closing, you want to put the shortest closing date possible, but definitely consult with your agent and your loan officer to see how quickly they can close a transaction, because the last thing you want to do is say that you can close it in 30 days and then it takes 60 days and you and your buyers just look completely out of whack because you essentially didn't know what you were getting yourselves into by putting a 30-day close, right? All right, so moving on, we're gonna go down here to page 6, paragraph 12. So settlement and other expenses, right? As I mentioned previously, you have your down payment and your closing costs. I've mentioned it in other videos as well. So your closing costs are essentially typically about 3% of the sales price, which is, fees that you incur while purchasing a home that you need to pay. There's no way of getting out of them in order to close on the home. So what this box here is for is essentially so you can put a dollar figure in terms of how much money in contribution you're gonna ask from the seller. So if I put, let's say I know for a fact, for example, I have $5,000 in closing costs, but I know I can't afford all of that. All I can afford is half of that. You can put in here $2,500, and these $2,500 will be basically taking out of the seller's end, and they will pay $2,500 to contribute to your closing costs to help you close. Now, obviously, this is gonna be a bad thing, right? And you only wanna do this if you absolutely have to, or depending on the circumstances of the deal, but this video is geared to, a very competitive market, so you wanna leave this blank. You wanna make sure you're asking from the seller as little as possible because you wanna be the most appealing offer, right? So don't ask for any closing costs if you don't have to, okay? Moving on. So one of the last basic things we're going to talk about is over here in the third-party financing addendum. So if you're financing a home, this is one of the pages that you will have to fill out. At the bottom of page 1, we have approval of financing. So this is almost always checked. And essentially what this is you're telling, the sellers like, hey, this offer is subject to us getting fully approved by the bank, right? So here in this little box right here, you're gonna essentially say, hey, we need 7 days, we need 14 days to fully get approved. If not, we can terminate the contract and still get our earnest money back, right? So you wanna keep this as low as possible. As a listing agent myself, I've seen people put 21 days, 25 days, 30 days to get approved, which is absolutely ridiculous. It makes their offer seem very weak. And it also is concerning from an agent standpoint, like, why is it gonna take them so long to get approved? It just doesn't make sense to me. So what you can do to shorten this is reach out to your loan officer and say, hey, once we get under contract, how much more time are you gonna need to fully approve everything? And we know for sure that the financing side of things is fully approved and ready to go. And they might say, hey, we only need 7 days. Or ask them as well, hey, what additional documentation and information do you need from me so I can shorten this time frame to as little as possible? And say that, they say, hey, as long as you get me, all of your income statements, your W-2s, et cetera, I can do this within a matter of a few days, right? And then you put that number here, or you tell your agent to do it, and it is obviously gonna make your offer seem a lot stronger because you're not asking for as much time, and it shows confidence in your ability to get the financing based off of, all the things that you went through when initially talking to your loan officer, right? Your credit, your income, your debt, and all that other good stuff, okay? Okay, so jumping into the advanced side of things. So one of the things that you can do is put in your contract, which is something that's called an escalation clause, which essentially is, you're saying, hey, whatever your highest offer is, I'm willing to give X amount of dollars above that. Now, I don't need to tell you that you need to be careful with this, because they might get some pretty crazy offers. And if you can't fulfill, then that deal isn't gonna go through. So be careful with this, but I just wanna make you aware it is something that you can do to say, hey, you know what, we'll give 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000, depending on how bad you want the home, above your highest offer. So again, that's an escalation clause. So going on to number 2, this can be geared towards both buyers and buyers agents. So you can make a video presenting your offer. So this is strictly, more for agents. As a listing agent, you got to understand that we go through so many offers and so many terms that it can get quite ridiculous. So one thing that you can do to really stand out from the crowd is, one, in your email, give a breakdown of your offer. Show them the price, the earnest money, the option, all of the main criteria that we discussed. State all of that in an easy little list for the agent to see, because this way they don't have to go through 15-20 pages of contract to fully comprehend your offer. Another thing you can do is give them a simple video, like, hey, let's just say his name is Jack. Like, hey Jack, how's it going? This is Kenneth with Summit Realty, and I wanted to get a quick chance to present my offer to you. So we are gonna offer $210,000. We are gonna offer $2K above the appraised value. We're not gonna ask for any option period, blah, 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 right? And this, as an agent, is gonna be such a relief and gonna be, a lot less difficult to understand than everybody else who just submits, the contract, right? You want to stand out. From a buyer's point of view, you can realistically send them a video, which is, kind of your story, your background on why you want the house. This does actually work. I know a lot of buyers kind of are shy to get in front of camera, but if you're really camera shy, you can go ahead and write a letter, but a video always works best. And you can just say something along the like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Lopez, I saw your house on 305 to Stefano Lane, and I gotta say, I love the house. It is an absolute beauty. We grew up in this neighborhood and we want to continue to live here. We loved everything about it, blah, 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 blah. Our daughter wants to go to the school across the street. And when you have 2 offers, right? And you have one who has a compelling story that you can connect with the buyer, the potential buyer, and another one where you're like, well, they haven't told me anything. That buyer who sent in that video could just get the offer. I had a recent client who was selling a house in her neighborhood. She had 2 houses on the same street. So she was selling one of her properties, and she knew that whoever she sold it to was gonna be her neighbor. So how powerful is that video when she gets to understand who her neighbor is, what they like, what they don't like, what are they about? It is huge, right? Compared to the person who doesn't say anything, and it's more of a mystery to her. So trust me, this is not something that you want to skip. Agents, push your buyers to do this, if not at least a handwritten letter that you can go ahead and deliver to the seller, because these things can be the deciding factor. Like I said with my client, that was one of the things that made her go with a certain offer, was the fact that she knew the kind of buyer that she was getting, going to be a part of her neighborhood. Okay, moving on to the very next step, we are going to be talking about unique benefits. Okay, so these are certain things that you can do as a buyer to go above and beyond that aren't necessarily part of the contract. So one thing that you can do is offer to pay for the seller's taxes. So that's a big one. You can offer the free leaseback option, which we talked about, giving them some time after you guys close the deal to fully transition out of the home, because nobody likes moving. It's super stressful. Which brings me to my next point, which is pay for their moving costs, right? Moving can get expensive, right? And if you can be the buyer that comes in and say, hey, look, not only are we going to give you additional time, we will pay for the movers to help you transition from this house to your next house, so you and your family don't have to do any heavy lifting, and all you have to do is, come wait for the delivery truck and essentially make that move out process for them as least stressful as possible. So another thing that you can do preemptively is bring a home inspector to your showing, right? This is gonna do 2 things. One, it's gonna allow the home inspector to go over a general overview of the property to make sure that there's nothing major wrong with the property. So this is gonna give you confidence as a buyer to know that, hey, well, they gave it a broad overview. There's nothing major wrong with the property. I'm willing to give a really, really strong competitive offer. And what it is also gonna do is, in the seller's eyes, they're gonna be able to get a little bit more peace of mind knowing that you've already had the property somewhat inspected, and you can translate this message to the seller's agent and say, hey, look, we're not gonna ask for any repairs. Or you can say, hey, look, we had a general overview, and our inspector is gonna get a more detailed analysis once we get the property under contract, but based on what we've seen, you know, the property looks great and we want to go ahead and move forward with a really strong offer, right? So it's a win-win for both parties. On your buyer's end, they get a little bit more peace of mind knowing that there's nothing major wrong with the property. And at the seller's mind, they know what they're getting into bed to in terms of, well, we know there's not anything major wrong with the property, and we know that they're either A, not gonna ask for any repairs, or B, if they are gonna ask for repairs, they're gonna be those more nitty-gritty things that typically are less expensive than the super major things that are easy to notice. A bonus tip that I'm sure some of you guys have been waiting for. So remember right here in this part of the contract where it says the option period. Now remember what this is. This gives you a certain amount of days to back out of the contract and still get your earnest money back. Well, the bonus tip is you can actually go ahead and leave this blank. And on this part of the contract where it says property conditions, you just want to make sure that the box that says has not received notice is checked, because what this is the seller's disclosure notice. So whenever you're buying a property, the seller must disclose any and all things wrong with the property that they are aware of. So it is a simple form that they send to you, and from the day you receive that notice, you have 7 days after that to back out of the contract for any reason and still get your earnest money back. So this is a unique way that you can actually go ahead and leave the option period blank. So it makes your offer seem stronger, but you are still protected in the fact that, you know, once you receive the seller's disclosure notice, you will have those 7 days to go ahead and back out of the contract. But you want to emphasize that the box says you have not received the notice, because if you just have received the notice and that's how you start off the contract, you don't have the same protection as if you were to put that you haven't received the notice. Alrighty guys, that is going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know this was a longer video, but I did want to jam pack it with as much information as I could to get you one step closer to getting into your dream home. If you liked it, please hit that like button. It really helps me out a ton. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing and turning on those post notifications. This way you stay ahead of the curve and you hear about this information early, and you have little to no competition when doing and implementing all these strategies. Like I said, you want to be at the forefront of this stuff. You don't want to be behind the curve, because then you're going to be losing your offers to other people that are implementing some of these strategies. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.